The helicopter detonated roughly 50 meters above the ridgeline, its rotor blades ripping apart in a roaring bloom of fire that washed across the Black Spire highlands like a second sunrise tearing open the sky. Staff Sergeant Mara Ellington, known on comms as Skyline Reaper, felt the shockwaves slam through her chest as she dove behind a jagged boulder, metal shards screaming past and skittering across the stone around her. "Falcon 3 is down. Repeat, Falcon 3 is down." The pilot's voice chopped apart mid-sentence as the burning frame spiraled into the valley below, taking her only ride out and 4 Rangers with it. She slapped her radio, trying to raise the other 2 birds from their insertion team, but all she heard was broken static until a faint, fractured transmission cut through. "All ground units. This is Falcon lead. Heavy fire from multiple SAM sites. Extraction impossible. You're on your own until we suppress air defenses. Minimum 12 hours. Good luck." Mara scanned her surroundings from 11,000 feet up on the ridge, 15 kilometers deep inside hostile territory in the Black Spire Highlands, where a rogue paramilitary force ran the valleys like its own empire. Her 5-person Ranger element never stood a chance. 2 died in the helicopter wreckage, 2 more dropped in the opening ambush, leaving her as the lone survivor. But the mission hadn't changed. Infiltrate enemy territory, locate Victor Drazen, the high-value butcher behind a wave of ethnic cleansing, and mark him for an airstrike. Drazen was fortified inside a mountain compound 3 kilometers higher at 13,000 feet, reachable only by climbing the sheer stone faces her fallen teammates were supposed to tackle with specialized gear. All Mara carried was her M4 with 8 mags, a Glock, 4 grenades, and a radio that might work if she could reach higher ground. No climbing kit, no backup, no survival probability worth calculating. But she had one thing the enemy never accounted for: Ranger training, and a vow that her team's deaths would not be wasted. Below her, engines echoed. Enemy patrols racing toward the flaming wreckage, searching for survivors. Above her rose thousands of feet of merciless ice and stone. Most soldiers would have hidden or surrendered. Mara simply started climbing. What happened over the next 8 hours would prove that the deadliest force on any battlefield isn't overwhelming firepower. It's a Ranger with no option except finishing the impossible alone. But before Major Tom's Tales walks you through how she free-climbed a vertical cliff under fire, wiped out an entire compound with barely enough ammo for half of it, and called in an airstrike that rewrote the operation, drop a comment and hit subscribe. Because Rangers never quit, never surrender, and never leave a mission unfinished. At 0630 hours, the ambush played out exactly opposite of intel predictions. Analysts claimed the mountain compound was lightly manned, 8 to 10 fighters max. They were catastrophically wrong. When the 3 Blackhawks crossed the ridgeline at dawn, they flew straight into a sculpted kill zone. Surface-to-air missiles streaked upward, and Falcon 3, Mara's bird, took a direct hit that hurled her out the door and onto the rocky slope, rolling 20 meters before she clawed onto an outcrop. When she looked back, the 2 Rangers who jumped with her were already gone. Holt Ramirez lay twisted on the stone where he'd snapped his neck, and Jace Halden bled out from burning shrapnel before he ever had a chance to crawl toward cover. The remaining Blackhawks managed to break away under brutal fire, barely clearing the next ridge. By Orocensus 4-5, Mara crouched behind a cluster of boulders below the ambush site, tallying what little she had left. M4A1 with ACOG, 8 magazines, Glock with 3 mags, 4 grenades, a knife, bare-bones survival gear, a weak radio, and a mission nobody sane would still attempt. Behind enemy lines, cut off for 12 hours minimum, patrols closing in, and sheer cliff faces ahead that required equipment she no longer had. But quitting wasn't in her vocabulary. She rechecked her weapon, secured her gear, and pushed uphill. The enemy expected survivors to flee down the mountain toward safety. She climbed upward, because Rangers don't walk away from a mission just because the world decides to make it hell. Surface-to-air missiles streaked upward and tore open the sky, and Falcon 3, Mara Ellington's bird, caught a direct hit that ripped the helicopter apart in a single, violent burst. The explosion flung her out of the aircraft, slamming her onto the jagged slope and sending her tumbling nearly 20 meters before she managed to claw herself onto an outcrop. When she looked back, the two Rangers who had jumped with her were already gone. Holt Ramirez had struck the rocks at a fatal angle and snapped his neck instantly, while Jace Halden took burning shrapnel through the chest and bled out before he ever had a chance to reach cover. The surviving helicopters scattered under brutal fire, barely limping over the next ridge. By 06:45, Mara was crouched behind a cluster of boulders 200 meters below the ambush point, taking inventory of what little she still had. An M4A1 with an ACOG, 8 magazines totaling 240 rounds, a Glock 19 with 3 mags, 4 M67 grenades, a combat knife, a small survival kit, a weak radio, some medical supplies, and a mission no sane person would still attempt. The problem stacked fast. She was 15 kilometers behind enemy lines in the Blackspire Highlands, cut off for at least 12 hours, with enemy patrols closing in on the crash site and sheer rock faces ahead that she'd have to climb without any of the equipment her dead teammates had been carrying. Her target was still 3 kilometers higher, and the compound was now fully alert. Most soldiers would have called the situation hopeless. Mara treated it like just another Tuesday. She checked her rifle again, smacked each magazine to confirm they were seated, and pushed uphill. The enemy expected any survivors to flee downward toward friendly territory. She went up, because Rangers don't abandon missions just because the universe decides to make them miserable. The initial climb wasn't technical, just a brutal slog through loose scree and scattered boulders, and she moved fast, keeping low and using dips in the terrain for concealment. Behind her, the pursuing patrol finally reached the smoking wreckage, their voices echoing in Serbian and broken English, a mix of ex-military and foreign fighters equipped with Serbian and Russian gear. At 11,400 feet, the terrain shifted mercilessly. A near-vertical slab of stone that normally required ropes, harnesses, and hardware her teammates were carrying when they died. Mara studied the wall, 60 meters of exposed climbing, almost no holds, patches of ice, and a single slip meant a straight fall to her death. She strapped her M4 across her chest, tightened every piece of gear, and began climbing without hesitation. Free soloing under combat conditions wasn't in any Ranger handbook, but she'd learned enough during the mountain phase of training to know the fundamentals. Test each hold, keep 3 points of contact, trust your body, manage the fear. Her fingers found a thin crack and she pulled herself upward, one movement at a time, the stone freezing her hands numb as she gained height. 20 feet, 30. The ground vanished beneath her, but she refused to look down. Looking down was for people who doubted themselves. At 40 feet, shouts rose from below. The patrol had spotted her. AK fire erupted, rounds smacking the rock around her, one passing close enough for her to feel the air rip across her ear, but she was too high and too narrow a target. Hitting her now required luck or divine intervention. She climbed anyway, 50 feet. The gunfire stopped. They'd realized they were wasting bullets and began scrambling up the slope to find an easier route. Mara reached the 60-foot ledge, swung herself up onto it, and immediately slid into a defensive firing position. 4 fighters were maneuvering across the slope below, angling to flank her position, so Mara Ellington dropped to a knee, leveled her M4, and steadied her breathing, knowing that at this distance, with an ACOG and years of training, it was barely a challenge. Her first shot punched straight into the lead fighter's chest, dropping him instantly. And the second round took the man behind him before he even realized what was happening. The remaining two panicked, firing wildly as they scrambled for cover, and Mara shifted a few inches to track the third fighter as he ducked behind a rock. The moment he leaned out to shoot, she sent a single round through him. The fourth had better instincts, hugging solid cover without exposing anything useful. So she waited, letting the second stretch until, 2 minutes later, he finally tried to shift for a better angle. She put 2 rounds through the gap and ended him. 4 down. More on the way. She didn't waste a heartbeat staying there and pushed upward again. By AO 745, at 11,800 feet, she reached the section that always required specialist climbing gear. A 100-meter vertical wall of slick stone with almost no features, thin patches of ice covering the few holds that existed. It was the kind of surface most climbers wouldn't approach, even with ropes and hardware. Without equipment, it looked like an unbroken slab designed to kill anyone foolish enough to attempt it. But Mara spotted a faint crack system on the left side, barely visible and only a couple centimeters deep. Crack climbing unprotected was considered madness even among seasoned mountaineers. You shoved your hands into the rock and hauled yourself up with raw strength and technique, where one mistake meant certain death. She'd trained for exactly this during mountain warfare courses, free climbing crack routes in the Embercrest Range, the Ravenwall Cliffs, the Torrenwild Peaks, learning to read stone and recognize handholds where others saw nothing. She reached into the narrow crack and began her ascent. The first stretch required brutal hand jams, ramming her hands into the crack and using sheer friction to hold her weight. It tore skin, made her joints scream, and drained her grip strength fast, but rangers weren't built for comfort. They were built to push through pain. She inched upward, jam by jam, boots scraping against smooth stone, catching tiny ridges most people would never notice. 20 meters. 30. Her shredded hands left streaks of blood on the rock, but stopping wasn't an option. Stopping meant falling, and falling meant the mission died with her. At 40 meters, she heard helicopter engines. Enemy M8s sweeping the area. One flew directly over her, close enough that she saw the door gunner scanning the slopes. But he never looked up. Nobody expected a ranger to be free climbing a vertical cliff in the middle of a firefight. At 50 meters, the crack narrowed, forcing her into fingertip locks, hauling her entire body weight on brutal finger strength. Most climbers wouldn't attempt even with full gear. She did it because she had no choice, because the mission demanded it, because rangers don't quit just because something hurts. 70 meters. The top of the wall was in sight. 20 meters left. Her forearms burned, her fingers felt like they were splitting open, but she kept climbing. 90 meters. 10 to go. Then she heard voices above. Fighters had reached the summit from an easier route, and she had no chance to pause or retreat. She had to push straight into whatever waited. At 95 meters, a boot appeared on the edge. A fighter leaned over, spotted her, shouted something like "American," and lowered his AK toward her. Mara did something instructors at Ranger School would talk about for years. She let go with one hand, hanging her entire weight from a single jammed hold, drew her Glock 19 with her free hand, and fired 4 rounds upward. 95 meters above the ground, dangling by one arm, she dropped him. The AK clattered past her and vanished below. She holstered the pistol and climbed the remaining distance, pulling herself over the rim just as 2 more fighters charged toward her. They were still lifting their rifles when she rolled forward, brought up her M4 and fired tight, controlled bursts, dropping them both before their fingers reached the triggers. But more were coming. She could hear an entire patrol, 8 to 10 fighters, scrambling toward her position. Mara scanned the terrain instantly. She stood on a narrow ledge boxed in on 3 sides by stone, a perfect kill zone if she stayed. Above her stretched another 200 meters of steep ground leading to the next plateau, and behind her was the 100-meter drop she'd just climbed. Below her yawned the 100-meter drop she had just clawed her way up, and the enemy fighters were closing in from the only open route toward her ledge. Mara Ellington snatched 2 grenades from her vest, set them carefully on the stone, pulled both pins while keeping her thumbs locked down on the spoons, then grabbed a 3rd grenade, ripped its pin free, and hurled it toward the advancing patrol. She counted under her breath, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, before the explosion thundered across the mountainside, followed by screams and frantic shouting. While they were stunned, she released the spoons on the 2 grenades at her feet and sprinted uphill, charging up the steep incline above the ledge as fast as her legs could move. A second later, the grenades went off in sequence, triggering the unstable slope beneath them. Tons of rock and shattered debris roared downward, swallowing the ledge and sealing off the path entirely. The fighters trapped below would need hours to find another way up. Mara didn't bother looking back. She just kept climbing toward the objective. By 1,000 hours, approaching the compound, she reached 2,400 feet and found a vantage point that gave her a clean line of sight to the enemy stronghold, roughly 600 meters away and just below her elevation. She raised her binoculars and studied the scene. Intel had gotten only one thing right. A mountainside compound existed, but nothing about its scale matched the briefing. This wasn't some tiny outpost. It was a full military installation carved into the mountain, with 20 to 30 fighters in view, PKM machine gun nests, mortar pits, reinforced bunkers, layered defenses, a mountain access road, satellite comms arrays, technical trucks with heavy weapons, and somewhere inside that maze, Victor Drazen, the architect of the massacres ripping through the valleys below. Her task was to mark the target for an airstrike, but with active air defenses, no aircraft could approach. First, she had to destroy the SAMs. She scanned until she found them. 2 positions, each manned by 2 fighters armed with shoulder-launched Russian Igla missiles. If she took them out, the sky would finally be theirs. 1 Ranger against a fortified bunker complex with 30 fighters. Most people would have quit on sight. Mara immediately began mapping the assault in her head. Then, through the glass, she spotted something worse. A cluster of around 20 civilians locked in crude cages along the eastern edge, villagers taken during the cleansing operations. The mission did not include rescue, but she wasn't going to call in an airstrike with innocent people trapped like animals. The mission had just become more complicated. At Aero 9:45, the assault began. Mara slid into a firing position 300 meters from the compound's eastern perimeter, the least defended flank because nobody sane approached from the route she'd just climbed. She tucked herself into a rocky outcrop with perfect sightlines, set up her M4 with the ACOG, and assigned priorities. Priority 1, the SAM crews, 2 sites, 2 operators each. Priority 2, the guards near the cages. Priority 3, communications, satellite arrays and antennas. Priority 4, the PKM gun nests, because leaving them intact meant instant death. 8 magazines, 240 rounds. Every shot mattered. She breathed out slowly, steadied her rifle, and started the assault. Shots 1 and 2. Northern SAM site. First operator down center mass. Shots 3 and 4. Second operator at the same site. Too slow to react. Another SAM operator tried to swing his launcher toward her, but Mara put 2 rounds into his chest and dropped him immediately. Chaos rippled across the compound as fighters scrambled, shouting, searching for a threat they couldn't see. Nobody expected a lone ranger 300 meters out, half hidden in the rocks. Shots 5 through 7. Southern Sam, first operator diving for cover, but she tracked him and fired. 2 hits and he collapsed. Shots 8 through 10. Second operator at the southern site, partially behind cover but exposed himself reaching for the launcher. 3 rounds later, he went down. With both SAM teams neutralized, the sky finally opened for aircraft. Shots 11 through 13. Guard tower near the cages. The guard was shouldering a machine gun to return fire when 3 rounds from Mara dropped him cleanly. Now the entire compound understood they were under attack. PKM nests erupted instantly, their heavy rounds chewing the rocks where she'd been seconds before. Heavy fire chewed viciously into the rocks around her, forcing Mara Ellington to drop behind cover as hundreds of PKM rounds shredded the spot she had occupied seconds earlier. She low-crawled 20 meters to a new firing angle and tucked herself behind another jagged outcrop while the PKM crews kept hammering her old position, convinced she was still there. Shots 14 to 17. Western PKM nest. The gunner remained locked on her previous location, giving her the perfect angle. 4 clean rounds, gunner down, assistant down. Shots 18 to 21. Eastern PKM nest. These fighters were sharper, already adjusting fire toward her new angle, so she fired faster, sacrificing finesse but not lethality. 4 rounds, 2 more bodies dropping. Heavy weapons neutralized. Then the incoming fire intensified again. AK bursts from multiple angles. Another PKM she hadn't seen yet. Even a mortar dropping rounds close enough to shake the ground beneath her. She was pinned, but Phase 1 was done. SAM teams eliminated, guards thinned. Time for Phase 2. Mara yanked her last grenade and hurled it toward a cluster of fighters pushing to flank her. The explosion scattered them long enough for her to break cover and sprint. Not away from the compound, but directly toward it. The move stunned them. Nobody expects a lone ranger to charge straight into withering fire. She closed 50 meters before they corrected their aim, rounds snapping past her head and kicking dirt at her boots. But she kept running. At 250 meters out, she dove into a shallow depression that shielded her from most angles, cutting the distance in half and putting her well within the lethal reach of her ACOG-equipped M4. She began clearing targets with cold precision. Fighters stepping into doorways got 2 rounds each. A rooftop shooter took 3. A squad trying to form a counterattack melted under controlled bursts. By then, she'd burned through her 3rd magazine and was deep into her 4th. Roughly 120 rounds spent, around 15 fighters down, and more still pouring out. Intel had catastrophically underestimated the manpower here. A sudden whoosh sliced through the air. An RPG fired straight toward her position. She rolled left just as it slammed into the ground where she'd been, the blast peppering her with stone fragments. Her ears rang, but she stayed locked in the fight. Shots 60 to 65. A technical truck screeched into position with a mounted machine gun ready to cut her in half. She dumped half a mag into the gunner and then into the driver through the windshield, sending the truck smashing into a wall. Her radio crackled alive amid the chaos. Any station, this is Falcon Lead. Air defense is suppressed. We can provide CAS if you can mark the target. Authenticate. Mara keyed her radio while squeezing off another round at a flanker. Falcon Lead, authenticate Charlie 7-9er. I'm 250 meters east of the compound. SAM sights are down, but I've got civilians locked in cages on the eastern side. You must hold fire until they're clear. Negative, Falcon Lead replied, tense and clipped. Ground unit is tasked with eliminating the HVT. Civilian rescue is not authorized. Mara dropped another fighter and responded, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you, I'm getting those civilians out before you drop ordnance. Give me 8 minutes. Silence, then a frustrated exhale. Ground unit, you don't have authorization to... Then, court-martial me when I get back. She cut in sharply. But I'm not leaving people in cages to die under an airstrike. 8 minutes. Another beat. 8 minutes. Falcon lead out. She switched frequencies before they could argue again. Now came the impossible part. 250 meters of open ground, dozens of defenders still alive, 4 prisoners to free, and only 8 minutes to get them all clear of the blast radius. Mara checked her ammo. 3 magazines left. They would have to carry her through the entire rescue. She sprinted straight toward the compound, firing as she moved, dropping a fighter who appeared in a window with 2 rounds through the glass without losing speed. Another stepped from behind a wall, and she shifted targets mid-stride, cut him down, and kept running. At 100 meters, she drew her Glock 19 with her left hand, while her right continued working the M4, firing ambidextrously and hitting targets on both sides of her advance. 2 fell to the pistol, another to her rifle. At 50 meters, she crossed the perimeter, and close-quarters battle took over completely. She slipped into room-clearing rhythm, slicing corners, checking angles, shooting anything that moved with ruthless precision. A fighter lunged from a doorway, and she put 3 rounds into him before he even lifted his weapon. 2 more attempted to crossfire her from opposite sides. She dove into a roll, came up firing, and dropped them both. She reached the cages 25 meters from the eastern perimeter where 4 terrified civilians huddled behind cheap padlocks she shattered with her Glock before yanking the doors open. "Go, down the mountain, American forces inbound." They stared blankly. No English. She pointed downhill and barked in Serbian, "Idi, beži, run." Her training finally clicked, and they bolted just as 3 enemy fighters spotted her and charged with rifles raised. The cages offered 0 cover, and Mara Ellington had nowhere to retreat. She planted her feet, lifted her M4, and fired. 2 rounds dropped the first fighter instantly. The second fired while advancing. Bullets sparked off the cages, one tugging her sleeve, another thumping into her plate carrier, but she ignored the impacts and put him down with 3 shots. The third fighter was smarter. He slid behind solid cover and hammered her with suppressive fire, pinning her with almost no ammunition left while the civilians fled behind her. Then she heard it. The unmistakable soul-shaking roar of A-10 Warthog engines overhead. Close air support had arrived early. She keyed her radio. "Falcon lead, civilians are clear. Hit the main building. Danger close. My exact position." "Copy. Guns, guns, guns." The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon unleashed hell, 3,900 rounds a minute of 30mm Fury, tearing the mountain apart. The ground didn't just shake, it vibrated through her bones. The main compound didn't merely take damage, it ceased to exist, shredded into nothing. The fighter who had pinned her was caught at the edge of the line and simply vanished. With the main building obliterated, it was time for hellfires. Mara pulled her laser designator and painted the communications bunker, the location intel marked as Victor Drazen's command center. Target locked. 2 AGM-114 Hellfires streaked in, the first slamming into the center of the bunker, the second hitting 2 seconds later, reducing the entire command hub to a fireball of debris and flame. Nothing inside survived, but Mara wasn't done. Through the swirling chaos, she spotted movement. 5 fighters running from a rear exit with documents and gear, one matching the HVT's profile exactly. After everything she'd endured, she wasn't letting him vanish. She sprinted forward with her M4 raised as they opened fire. She dove behind a burning vehicle, rounds sparking off the metal, then popped up and returned fire. 2 escorts dropped instantly while the remaining 3 scattered, 2 fleeing toward the tree line, as Victor Drazen sprinted for a vehicle. Mara tracked him through her optic, 50 meters running hard, steadied her breathing, led the shot, fired. The round hit him, staggering him but not dropping him. Body armor. She fired again, lower this time, shredding his leg and sending him crashing down. His 2 surviving escorts turned back to help him. A fatal mistake. Mara fired short, controlled bursts and dropped them both before closing in on the wounded HVT. He clawed for a pistol, but she kicked it away and leveled her rifle at him. "Don't move," she said in English, then in Serbian. "Ostani dol, stay down." He froze, bleeding heavily. She zip-tied his wrists, cinched a tourniquet around his thigh, and secured him. Alive meant intel, dead meant nothing. She keyed her radio. "Falcon lead, HVT captured." "I repeat, captured, not killed. Need immediate extraction, 1 prisoner, my location. Copy, Blackhawk inbound, 2 minutes." Those 2 minutes dragged like an hour as Mara held security over the wounded Drazen, scanning the burning ruins for movement. Reinforcements could appear at any moment. Then she heard it. Engines on the mountain road. Enemy vehicles inbound. "Falcon lead," she snapped into the radio. "They're coming." "I've got vehicles approaching. I need that bird now." 30 seconds, Falcon lead answered. 2 technical trucks whipped around the curve, each mounting a heavy machine gun, nearly 20 fighters total. Mara Ellington had 1 magazine left, 28 rounds. The first technical charged head-on. She exhaled, steadied her aim, and dumped 10 rounds into the driver and engine block, sending the truck veering off course until it smashed into a tree and died. The second technical was smarter, stopping at a distance as its gunner unleashed a violent wave of PKM fire, rounds tearing the dirt around her and chewing up the ground. She grabbed Victor Drazen by the vest and dragged him toward the only real cover available, a half-destroyed concrete bunker, while heavy rounds blasted chunks of concrete off its surface. She checked her ammo. 18 rounds left. 20 fighters coming, a mounted machine gun, and 0 support on the ground. The math was terrible. Then she heard the sweetest sound a ranger ever hears. Rotors. A Blackhawk roared in low and aggressive. Door gunners already raining fire. Minigun bursts shredded the second technical, ripping through the truck and anyone near it in a storm of sparks, dirt, and metal. "Ground unit, we're landing hot. Get that prisoner aboard now." Mara hauled the wounded Drazen up, slung his arm over her shoulder, and sprinted toward the descending Blackhawk. Fighters opened up from the tree line, but the door gunners answered with a wall of minigun fire that obliterated branches and forced the attackers back. She shoved Drazen inside the cabin and leapt in after him just as the helicopter lifted off, rounds sparking harmlessly against the armored hull. They climbed fast, leaving behind the burning compound, the bodies, and the mountain she had just conquered. The crew chief stared at her, covered in rock dust, dried blood, cordite, uniform torn, hands shredded, still clutching her M4 with the last magazine seated. "Ma'am, you're bleeding," he said, noticing the dark red seeping down her sleeve. "Flesh wounds," she muttered. "Plates stopped the rest. I'm fine." He shook his head. "You climbed that mountain without gear, fought 30 fighters alone, saved civilians, and captured the HVT. Ma'am, that's not good, that's legendary." Mara said nothing. She was too drained to speak. She glanced back at the mountain. The impossible climb, the firefight, the friends she'd lost, the mission she refused to abandon. Her hands throbbed from torn skin. Her plate carrier hid 3 minor gunshot wounds. And she'd burned through 2 rifle mags, 33 pistol rounds, and all 4 grenades. But the mission was done. The HVT was alive. 20 civilians were safe. Her team, Holt Ramirez, Jace Halden, Mira Lawson, Tyrell Kane, Avery Strickland, had been avenged. As the Black Hawk carried her toward friendly lines, she finally allowed her eyes to close and, for the first time in hours, let herself rest. A week later, the captured Drazen provided intel that led to the arrest of 47 paramilitary leaders and prevented 3 planned massacres. Documents recovered from the compound revealed a sprawling network coordinating ethnic cleansing across 3 countries. The 20 civilians she saved later testified before the Norval Tribunal, helping convict multiple war criminals, including 2 generals and a political figure who orchestrated the atrocities. Without them, many would have escaped justice forever. Mara Ellington received the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award. The citation praised her impossible gearless climb, her one-woman assault on a fortified installation, the rescue of civilians under direct fire, and the capture of a high-value target after her entire team had been killed. At the White House ceremony, the families of her fallen teammates stood with her. Holt Ramirez's mother pulled Mara into a tight embrace and whispered, "Thank you for finishing what they started. Thank you for making their sacrifice matter." During the press conference, a reporter asked how she found the strength to complete a mission that should have killed her. "Rangers trained for the worst-case scenario," Mara said. "We trained for broken gear, lost teammates, being outnumbered and outgunned. What happened on that mountain was terrible, but not outside what Rangers prepare for. My team started the mission. I finished it. That's what Rangers do. We don't leave missions unfinished, and we don't let our teammates' sacrifice lose meaning." Another journalist pressed, "But you went far beyond your mission parameters. You risked an airstrike to save civilians who weren't part of the objective." Mara straightened, voice firm. "Rangers lead the way. That means going first into danger, but it also means living the values we represent. I wasn't going to call in an airstrike on people locked in cages. My team wouldn't have wanted that. They wouldn't have stood for it, and neither will I. We're warriors, but we're warriors with a moral compass." That's what Mara Ellington said later, explaining that sometimes the hardest part of a mission isn't the fighting. It's choosing the right thing when nobody's watching, when nobody would ever know you took the easier way out. She returned to the 75th Ranger Regiment and refused every offer to move into staff roles or training positions. She wanted to stay operational, to keep leading Rangers on real missions. But her story, her free solo climb under fire, the one-woman assault on a fortified compound, the rescue of civilians, and the capture of a high-value target after losing her entire team, spread across special operations units worldwide. 6 months after the mission, Mara was promoted to Sergeant First Class and given command of her own Ranger fire team. She trained them relentlessly in mountain warfare, gearless movement, and the ethics of making the right decision when everything collapses. During a mountain training exercise in Colorado, one of her Rangers suffered a rope failure mid-ascent. The others instantly scrambled to build a rescue system, calling for support and preparing anchors. Mara watched for 30 seconds, then simply started climbing. Free solo, no rope, no gear, no hesitation. She reached the stranded private in 4 minutes, brought him down safely, then gathered her team. "Rangers don't wait for perfect conditions or perfect equipment," she told them. "You train with gear so you're skilled, but you train without gear so you're capable." That Ranger was in danger. The fastest way to reach him wasn't building a system, it was climbing. So I climbed. That's what Rangers do. We solve problems with whatever we have. Sometimes that's equipment. Sometimes it's just training in your own body. The private later said, I was hanging there terrified, and then I looked down and saw Sergeant First Class Ellington climbing toward me with no rope, no harness, just her hands and feet. In that moment, I understood what being a ranger actually means. It's not about gear or perfect conditions. It's getting it done, no matter what. Eventually, a small memorial was built near the helicopter crash site. A stone monument with 5 names: Holt Ramirez, Jace Halden, Mira Lawson, Tyrell Kane, Avery Strickland, the Rangers who began the mission. Under their names, one line was carved: Rangers lead the way. Whenever Mara trained in the region, she visited the monument, placed her hand on each name, and made the same promise. Your mission was finished. Your sacrifice mattered. You'd be proud of how it ended. But the real monument wasn't the stone marker. It was the doctrine, the training, the mindset that emerged from that impossible day. The techniques Mara used, free climbing under fire, solo assault tactics, snap decision-making under extreme conditions, were rewritten directly into Ranger training programs. Her mission became a case study throughout special operations, then conventional units, and eventually among Allied militaries worldwide. It wasn't just a tactical lesson. It became a lesson in leadership, grit, and moral clarity when everything falls apart. A story about how one ranger completed the mission, honored her fallen team, and proved that even in the darkest moments, Rangers lead the way. A year after the mission, Mara received a letter from one of the civilians she saved, a young woman named Elena, who had spent 3 weeks locked in those cages, fully expecting to die. You appeared like an angel of death to our captors and an angel of mercy to us, Elena wrote. We had lost all hope. We believed we would die in those cages or suffer something even worse. Then you came down from the mountain alone, bleeding, fighting like a storm, and you freed us. You didn't have to. You were there to stop the killers, not save the victims. But you saved us anyway. You risked everything to give us our lives back. My children live because of you. My husband lives because of you. I live because of you. We will never forget. Thank you, Ranger. Mara Ellington carried that letter in her pocket on every mission. Whenever things turned bleak, whenever choices grew heavy, whenever command weighed like stone across her shoulders, she would touch that folded scrap of paper and remind herself why Rangers do what they do. Not for medals, not for headlines, but because somewhere out there are people who need justice, who need protection, who need someone willing to climb impossible mountains and take impossible risks simply because it is right. They left her stranded on a high ridge at 11,000 feet with no team, no gear, no support, and enemy fighters closing from every direction. She climbed 2,000 vertical feet of raw stone with torn, bleeding hands. She destroyed 2 SAM sites with blisteringly accurate fire. She assaulted a fortified compound defended by 30 fighters with barely enough ammunition to handle half of them. She freed 20 captives under direct fire. She captured a war criminal who would have slipped across the border and vanished forever. Because that is what Rangers do. They improvise, adapt, overcome, finish the mission no matter what. They choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong. They refuse to quit even when quitting would be the logical option. And that mountain would never forget the day one Ranger proved that impossible was just another way of saying, mission accepted. The odds didn't matter. The terrain didn't matter. The obstacles didn't matter. What mattered were the people who needed saving, and the Ranger creed hammered into her through years of training. Rangers lead the way. She had led the way up an impossible climb, through an impossible fight, and into an impossible victory. And in doing so, she proved something every Ranger believes. But that mountain made undeniable. There is no challenge too great, no mission too dangerous, no circumstance severe enough to justify giving up. There is only training, determination, moral courage, and the refusal to let the word impossible go unchallenged. Staff Sergeant Mara Ellington climbed without ropes, fought without support, and won without backup. Because Rangers don't need perfect conditions. They only need a mission and the will to finish it. And that will, forged in training, tested in combat, carried forward in legacy, is what sets Rangers apart. They don't accept impossible. They defeat it. One mission, one mountain, one impossible circumstance at a time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories every week on Major Tom's Tales.